We've got one member waiting, Councillor Portney, but he should be in shortly. Otherwise, we're all here. Apart from Councillor Pearce, who's given his apologies for lateness. We have 4 brief housekeeping rules. Firstly, if you have a mobile, please switch off. Secondly, if you need to use the toilets, they're either side of the entrance. Thirdly, no fire alarm is planned to go off, so if it does, it's a real thing. Please leave at the entrance, go down the ramp on the right and assemble by the cathedral. And finally, as you may be aware, masks may be removed while seated in debate, but if you're walking through a communal area like the corridors, please put them on. Apologies for absence and subs. Oliver?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Tom Hathaway, and Councillor Guy Poultney will be substituting for him today. Thank you.
3 declarations of interest. I believe 2 members may have them. Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, I've got a connection with the first 3 planning applications that we're going to hear today, 9A, 9B and 9C, as all in my ward, and my support for all 3 is well known.
Fine. Ed.
Thank you, Chair. I work for Sustrans. I developed the National Cycle Network in a UK-wide role. I'm the Director of Paths for Everyone there. I have no involvement in this project, even though the current NCN alignment is at each end of the 9A and B. And I have checked the map, and that would be a route that Sustrans would approve of in terms of our master plan. But I do believe my experience as a transport professional will be useful to the committee, and I'm coming to this with a genuinely open mind and can see the arguments on both sides.
Yes, and you, Ed, you were kind enough to raise that with me beforehand, and I can't see any conflict of interest too. 4 minutes of the last meeting. Sorry, Paul.
Just to say, the last application is in my ward,
Indeed.
but I'm not predetermined about it, so I don't think that's a problem.
4 minutes of the last meeting. Can I formally move these? Do I have a seconder? Paul, thanks. 5 is the action sheet. There's reference there to the briefing or discussion about planning enforcement. When we discussed that last month, I said we might actually have a discussion of leads at the next DC Agenda Conference. In the event I did reflect upon that, I believe that actually members of both committees would have an interest in that. And also the Tree Forum have raised issues as well. And I believe it would be beneficial for them to be involved. So I've suggested we discuss how we manage that. So both committees are involved at the next DC Leads meeting on the 20th of April. 6 appeals. Gary?
Thank you, Chair. If you bear with me, I'll just give you some highlights from the report. As ever, it sets out the appeals received, including those that are subject to public inquiry and hearings, and also at the end it refers to decisions received as well. At the start of the inquiry section, which is top of page 19, makes reference to the long-awaited Silverthorne Lane decision from the Secretary of State, still awaited. And then item 19 on the same page is the former police dog and horse training centre site on Clanage Road, which is the site of a proposal from the Caravan Club to relocate there. Again, was subject to a Secretary of State call in an inquiry last year. Originally, we were due to have received that decision by now. Then we had a date of, I think, the start of this month. That was then put back by another month because members may well be aware that a new planning minister was appointed during the reshuffle. So the new planning minister needed to be briefed on this as well because they actually signed these off. And so that was a delay of a month as well. And then on top of that, of course, we had a one or two storm units in particular, in quick succession over one weekend. That prompted the applicants in this case to make a further submission based upon what was experienced or not experienced at the site during those storms. And clearly the Secretary of State, assisted by the Planning Inspector, had to give all parties the right to comment on that. So the Council provided no further comment, but the Environment Agency did. So we're probably still about another month away from receiving that decision, but I just wanted to give you the background to that further delay. Ironically though, at the top of the next page, item 20, the site at 10 Feeder Road, that was subject to an inquiry only earlier this year, so it was kind of behind those previous decisions in the queue, so to speak. But this one isn't under the Secretary of State. This was a standard planning inspector decision, and we actually received that decision last week, so hence it hasn't been formally reported in these papers, and we will report on it in more detail next time around. But just to advise you that that scheme that had been refused under delegated authority on flooding grounds, the planning inspector, having heard evidence from all parties, including the developers, the council and the Environment Agency, has decided to allow the appeal and grant planning permission. It is, however, subject to what we call a Grampian condition, which is a requirement for something to happen before either development starts on site, or in this case it becomes occupied, because this is largely student accommodation. But there are a number of comments within the decision that need further consideration by all parties, so we've just started that process at the moment. So when we're sort of further advanced in our thinking about the implication of that decision, then we'll update you further. So just to let you know, that one has in fact been allowed, which is of some surprise to some people. Then moving on to other appeals running that will be of interest. I think it was the previous municipal year this committee considered the application referred to on item 33, which is on page 22, which is Swift House on Albert Crescent in the middle of St Phillips. This was a proposal for a waste transfer station. So that was decided upon by this committee in April last year, refusal of permission. That's going through written representations process at the moment, having been received at the end of last year. So again, we'll update you once the decision's received on that one. And then in terms of actual decisions, the one in particular I wanted to draw your attention to was, it's listed as item 64, which is on page 26, about halfway down. And this is a site at 6 Clyde Park, which members will be familiar with. It's one that you refused at your August meeting last year. You'll see there from the report though, and I may have circulated the decision when it came out in the middle of last month. The planning inspector decided to allow the appeal and grant planning permission in those circumstances. So unless there's any further comments or questions, Chair, that's my update for this time around.
Thanks, Gary. Regarding 6 Clyde Park, and I'm sure Guy may have views, personally, I deeply regret that allowing that appeal. We did move, and the majority of members here refused it, of course. What I would say, clearly, actually, a lot of members in the past have wanted to throw the kitchen sink in grounds for objection at it, and the officers have cautioned against that. And I seem to recall we only had one substantive reason. So whilst the inspector had overturned that refusal, they didn't work off. So clearly, you know, there's some mitigation for us, of course. Councillor Portney, do you want to comment?
If I may, yes, Chair, just to echo your regret, it's certainly a regret to the other residents of Clyde Park who are absolutely devastated. I was just going to ask, when we do have these instances where planning inspector overturns the decision of a committee, is there any kind of introspection or what I would call an after-action review in terms of looking at areas where we could strengthen our policies as a council next time our planning policies come up for review to ensure that the committee has more teeth when making these decisions?
I think every appeal decision's a learning point, really, and some like the Feeder Road one really challenge what a lot of thinking has been on things like flood defence and safe means of access and egress. So that's a real fundamental that's got a lot of people scratching their heads and having meetings to discuss what could amount to a change in the strategy rather than the policy, change in the strategy going forward. I would say the cases like Clyde Park are ones that it was open to interpretation really as to what the outcome was going to be. It comes down to things like amenity, which is very subjective. One person's view on an acceptable level of amenity is different to another person's, and what kind of opens the door for applications like 6 Clyde Park are the kind of the policies that are supportive of delivering housing within the city, meeting the housing need, and including land that's currently gardens at the moment. So I wouldn't say something like that is something that would change, that kind of really challenges our policy. But in terms of the local plan review, I think if we were to seek to tighten up those kind of things, it would be quite a dramatic shift really. And at the end of the day, the inspector, I think, looked at amenity issues which are really hard to kind of be very prescriptive about in a policy sense, really.
If I may, Chair, one other question. Given significant resident fears around the immediate application for an HMO status for the property, as well as for lots of other surrounding properties, I appreciate that there's a meeting to be had to discuss planning enforcement, but I'm thinking specifically around houses and multiple occupation and their significant growth in their numbers in some parts of the city, particularly around the university, whether there could be specific attention paid to the issues of the need to enforce against HMO licence and particularly against unlicensed HMOs when that conversation comes back to members of these committees.
Certainly, Chair, I can certainly reassure members that HMOs is at the very top of that list in terms of our enforcement priorities, particularly as we're seeing more are coming to our attention because of the licensing approach, which might end up in a housing licence but doesn't then give them planning permission. So that's providing us with lots of information now that we haven't been able to act upon until recently, but now we are making some progress with that, and we can update that in the session that the Chair's talked about.
Guy, I seem to have a sense of deja vu about this. I seem to recall you only yesterday in your speech in favour of the honorary aldermanship for Anthony Negus mentioning this. So clearly it's something close to your heart.
I think close to the hearts of all the Cotham residents. I feel myself sounding more and more like Councillor Negus every day. As terrifying as that might sound.
It does. Do any other members have questions? No, in which case we'll move to 7 enforcement. Can I mention that you will have received a replacement email from Gary earlier today, and Councillor Varney in particular will be pleased to hear that Bris West exists. Gary?
Yes, thank you. And apologies for the late circulation of the updated report, because we all knew that the Wye Vale Garden Centre notices have been served, but we've been waiting for them for so long. So to not see them come forward on the committee papers was a particular frustration, and I identified that last week. But unfortunately, as you'll be aware also, our kind of main planning online system and all the back office system behind that has been down as well, which meant that we couldn't attend to that straight away. So we managed to identify a problem in how they were inputted that meant that they weren't coming through into the committee report. So we've corrected that now, and I'm glad to see them finally on there. So they'll be on the same report for Committee B as well, and we'll focus on trying to make sure that kind of inputting error doesn't happen again, so that at least you get a genuine view of what notices are being served out there.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you very much, Gary, for the update. I know there are a couple of outstanding enforcement notices for Wyvale, I think, regarding the illegal removal of trees. And I'm just wondering, do you have any idea when those enforcement notices will be served?
So I don't know the latest with those, but what I will do is I'll get an officer update, which I can share with you and your fellow board member.
And Paul, I'm afraid my sign language isn't very good. What were you saying?
Yeah, no, it was just that when an email this morning was mentioned, I hadn't received one, but it's literally been sent over to me now, but I haven't had a chance to scrutinise it, unfortunately.
And V? No. In that case, thanks, Gary. Can we move to item 8, public forum? Now, it's connection at this committee that we receive public forum statements immediately before each item. So when I call members in the order of receiving their statements, please make your way to the mic and you have minutes to summarise your statement. Can I assure you, every member and officer here has read the full statement, so don't feel you're being shortchanged, but if you could summarise it in about a minute, that would be helpful. What I would say, we discussed this, and since item 1 and 2 about the cycle lane are two separate applications, but basically there's the same issue, we're going to take them together. So we'll do straight then, we'll break between the two individual applications. Right. The first person I have is Councillor Varney. I must say, he's put in two submissions. So normally we keep to 1 minute, but I'm more than happy for him to speak to 2 minutes.
I'm also speaking on behalf of Councillor Joss Clark,
Indeed.
and she does like to go on a bit as well, so a bit of extra time would be most welcome. Thank you, Chairman. No, I'll keep it to 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Chairman, for allowing me a few moments to express my strong support for these applications. This statement is also on behalf of my fellow ward councillor, Joss Clark, who is unfortunately unwell and unable to be here today. Committee members will hopefully have seen our written statements detailing our 5-year campaign to get this derelict but beautiful patch of land opened up as an active travel corridor, the Brislington Greenway. And I want to thank everyone who has supported our campaign thus far, including the 2,500 Bristolians who signed our petition calling for an active travel corridor here. If I may, I'd just like to make a couple of points. Firstly, the central argument against this proposal is that the route is earmarked for a future transport scheme, the Callington Road Link. And indeed, throughout our 5-year campaign, we have been told repeatedly that traffic will be reallocated from the A4 along the former Brislington railway alignment in order to free up space on the Bath Road. However, last year, the Mayor suddenly announced there was no plan to build a road here. In fact, Councillor Clark and I were called liars for even saying that such a scheme existed, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Chairman, I'm sure you'll agree that the fact that this announcement was made just before the local elections was pure coincidence. More recently, however, in full council, both the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor have repeated the claim, saying on the public record that there is no plan to build a road along the former Brislington railway line. Now, I would not be so disrespectful as to accuse someone of lying, so I would take them at their word, and I would urge committee members to do the same. There is no plan to build a road here, and therefore the central argument against this scheme is null and void. Now, obviously, the Mayor forgot to send the memo to the transport team, but there is no reason whatsoever to vote against this proposal, and indeed, as we have set out in our written statements, many reasons to vote for it. Now, I know some concerns have been raised about the standard of the cycling infrastructure to be provided, but can I remind committee members, this is a temporary scheme. It's being paid for by a private company. The expression, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, springs to mind. It's better than a lot of other cycling infrastructure in Bristol, including the sections that this new path will link up with. An imperfect cycle path is surely better than no cycle path at all. If approved, conditions can be attached to the application to deal with any obvious issues, and improvements can be made further down the line. But, and I apologise, Chairman, for taking the Lord's name in vain, for God's sake, let's get this site opened up for the people of Brislington. It's been derelict for far too long.
Thank you, Councillor Varney. And can you please convey our best wishes to Joss? We hope she's better soon. Fred Wyatt, please.
Hi, I'm Fred. I run Bristol-based Meanwhile Creative. We take derelict or vacant properties and marry them with people with good ideas. We recently we've been establishing container maker villages, and this awkward strip of land seemed perfect to do the same. But being a sensitive site with community aspirations for a cycle path, we wondered if working with John Grimshaw, the founder of Substitutions, we could combine the two, providing 50 single-storey starter spaces in a sustainable location alongside a safe and accessible cycle and pedestrian route for 3 years. Its benefits being 800 metres of new pathway, help 50 businesses get off the ground, lots of new and accessible public green space, generate £50,000 per year in business rates to the city, and it's temporary. We've had great support, including Marvin Rees when I met him on site. I had good conversations with TDM initially, so I was surprised by their objection, even though our concept does not impact their 40-year desire for a new road. And concerning the local wildlife, the containers will only sit on the existing hard standing, so there's virtually no disturbance there. And the natural setting itself will attract a type of tenant who, in conjunction with ourselves, will become living curators to nurture the site. I'm sorry the submission was light on supporting material, but with so much uncertainty, it was difficult to risk more than the 25k I've already put into it over the last 2 years on a temporary project. However, I understand everything outstanding can be dealt with by condition. If you grant consent, I'd be very proud of this as one of the best projects we've ever done. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Fred. Councillor Remington. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm sorry Andrew made that political, because I'd like to say that I've been supporting this ever since I first moved into the area as well. But a cycle path along the old railway line in Brislington was proposed by the council's cycling team as far back as 2010, but it didn't happen because of the proposed Callington Link Road. So now in 2022, the same reason is being used to oppose this application. To say this proposal is premature is therefore faintly ridiculous. Any scheme to build a fully segregated bus route along the A4 is still several years away and may not need to use the railway path at all. Last week I walked the route with officers to explain in great detail how I think this could be done. We have two good and complementary plans here. Meanwhile Creative have received a warm welcome in cities such as Manchester and Cardiff for their innovative approach to providing flexible, affordable and practical spaces. Yet here in Bristol, their hometown, they found us to be less responsive and enthusiastic. Greenways and cycle routes have built paths for the Strawberry Line, Ashton Court Greenway and Wye Valley Greenway, yet we've put every obstacle in their way here. So
Hello, dear committee. This scheme promises to improve the health and well-being of the community with increased access to green space and a safe walking and cycling corridor that provides pollution-free travel at a time when climate change asks that we think creatively and act immediately. The imaginative use of this space by Meanwhile Creative for enterprises to hire containers is a great way to support recovery, micro-businesses and the local Sandy Park High Street. All seem to be current aims for the council, which would see increased trade in the area. The busy A4 is a real barrier to cycling particularly, and the scheme would help more nervous riders and underrepresented groups. Furthermore, the Council's new strategy for livable neighbourhoods aims to bring attractive and safe walking and cycling infrastructure, which also fits these aims. We should bear in mind the University of Bristol's assertion that the biggest growth and overall proportion of sustainable travel in Bristol need to be walking and cycling to achieve net zero, and can also be done for less cost. The transport team's concerns about prejudicing the application seems to sound to me like they're worried people will enjoy and use it too much, which is just crazy. This scheme asks the council to walk the walk and grab opportunities when they arise at a time when we need to act now to improve health, recovery, sustainable travel. Granted approval, the space will effectively become a new park, cycle path, walking trail and mini enterprise hub all in one. It seems too good an opportunity to pass by. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. We now move to the first application. Richard Sewell is actually presenting this, and Richard will shortly present this. You have full copies in your papers. Now, as you're aware, it's convention here for officers to summarise the report in no more than 5 minutes. I have to say, because we have two linked applications, maybe if Richard's going to set the context, he may want to go over the 5 minutes for the first one, but your chairman's not going soft, you'll be reassured. I'm going to dock him from his 5 minutes for the second item. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So first up, we have application 21034. The address is landline to the east of Tramway Road on former railway land in Brislington. It's a temporary 3-year permission for the erection of 50 shipping containers to be used for Class E business and commercial purposes, together with a shared pedestrian and cycle pathway. As mentioned, this is the first of 2 applications that I'll be presenting today, both of which relate to adjoining pieces of former railway land in Brislington. Both applications are separate, but both in terms of applicants and plan drawings, but both involve the installation of a temporary pedestrian cycle pathway on land that is safeguarded in the local plan as a major transport route along the A4 corridor, which is known as the Callington Road Link. My colleagues from Transport are here today to answer any questions on this issue and to provide input on the relevant site-specific and wider strategic implications associated with this key mass transit corridor. Since the publication of the amendment sheet yesterday, further comments have been received by the South West Transport Network and Rail Future Sevenside, who raised concerns that the installation of a cycleway on this route could undermine future mass transit routes in Bristol and the Bath City regions. The application has been called into consideration by committee by Councillor Clark, who is in support of the proposal.
Sorry, Richard, could I just ask you to pause there? Steve, it's great to see you. I'm delighted you made such progress. I'm sure I don't need to remind you, because you sadly missed the beginning, the public forum. You're prohibited in this case from deliberating, so that's fine. Fine, thanks. Sorry, Richard.
No worries. So the application has been called into consideration by Councillor Clark, who is in support of the proposal. In total, 57 letters of support have been received and 27 objections. The officer recommendation is that the application is refused. So first up, you can see the proposal site outlined in red here. To the north is the Bristol Council Sandy Road depot. This is Sandy Road of the High Street. The former railway land extends behind the Go Outdoors and Dunhelm retail stores. You can see on the left-hand side here the A4 Bath Road. The next application that we'll be discussing is the land from the red section down to the blue line here, which is the Whitchurch Way cycle path. And that's so the proposal site we're considering now extends from Sandy Park down to the car park behind the Lodeca pub here. This is the existing site plan, so you can see, it's orientated so that north is to the left. And so the proposal site goes underneath the Sandy Park Road Bridge. The northern section is quite overgrown, you can see there. And then the southern section here is existing tarmac. I think it's a car park that was formerly used for the Plymouth Brethren Meeting Hall. So quick view of some site photos. So this is the site entrance underneath the Sandy Park Road Bridge. This is the view south from the bridge. You can see that the northern section of the site is very overgrown and disused. This is looking north from the tarmac section further to the south, so you can see why it's considered to be a wildlife corridor. This is looking north along the existing area of hard standing, so the proposed cycle path and pedestrian path will extend along the left-hand side here, and to the right-hand side is where the shipping containers are going to go. This is looking south. This is where this proposal site adjoins the following application. So this is looking south here. To the right is the access road leading to Tramway Road. So this is the proposed site plan. You'll see the bike path here, which is 3 meters wide, will extend along the western site boundary. all the way along to the end of the site here where the next site begins. In the southern section of the site where the Haas standing is, this is where the 50 shipping containers are going to go, with access from Tramway Road here. You'll notice that in the northern section of the site, there's hardly any development at all proposed. It's just this surfaced bike path and pedestrian path which extends along the full extent of the site. This is the northern section in a bit more detail, so you'll see that the site will be accessed across the Bristol City depot. It'll go underneath the bridge and then extend to the south along here. These are the shipping containers. At the end, there's a shared kitchen and a shared toilet, and then there's some disabled parking and bike parking proposed. These are the elevation drawings. The east elevation is proposed. The third one down is probably the most important one because you can see the relationship of the shipping containers and the properties to the east along Repton Road. You'll see that they sit quite low. There won't be any overlooking, and it's about 15 metres between properties. So when you take into consideration the existing railway embankment and soft landscaping, it's not considered that there'll be any real impacts on amenity. So this is the crux of the issue. This is the Callington Road link highlighted in green. Now this is a safeguarded route in both the core strategy and the development management allocations plan. BCS 10 and DM 24 state that this is safeguarded for potential future transport links to relieve congestion on the A4. So our colleagues in transport have strongly objected to the principle of this because they believe that any development in this location could prejudice the wider strategic scheme of the Callington Road link. The proposed pathway doesn't include provision for public transport, meaning it cannot be considered to be fully multimodal solution, which could help reduce car resilience, cut emissions and alleviate congestion. In addition, the proposed pathway being only 3 metres wide is not considered to meet the most up-to-date local authority design guidance on shared segregated pathways, as they must be 5 metres wide. So there's 3 reasons for refusal for consideration today. The first is the in-principle objection relating to the safeguarding of the Callington Road link. The second one relates to the narrow width of the proposed path, meaning it's not considered safe for all users. And then thirdly, because of the temporary nature of the application and the overall construction of the containers, it's not possible to secure on-site renewable energy. However, the applicant has agreed to pay a financial contribution to off-site renewable provision. This needs to be secured under a Section 106, but as this hasn't been finalised, we have to include it as a reason for refusal so that in the event of appeal, the inspector can deal with it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. We'll move to questions now. Could I just kick off, please? As the committee knows full well, their chairman's quite a simple soul. For example, I know I was a strong supporter of the South Bristol Link Road through my ward. That was mooted in the late 40s. It was eventually started to be built in 2014, and finished in 2017. So it took about 70 years from start to finish. I'm slightly doubtful, in fact, I'm completely doubtful that the road you're talking about would be commenced within 3 years. I suspect 10 years at the bare minimum, but what evidence do you have it would be fast-tracked?
Could I defer to my transport colleagues on this issue, please?
Sure. I'm Adam Crowther, Head of City Transport. I think, the Callington Road link has been talked about for a long time. I think the pertinent fact is that we have 130 million allocated in the CRSTS settlement, the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. That is for delivery between 2022 and 2027. It includes the A4 scheme that goes from Bristol to Bath, which includes this section. So we have funding committed over the next 5 years. We've been out to initial engagement. We are drawing up proposals, and we'll be looking at the next stages of consultation shortly. We've briefed local councillors on where we are, and we're currently discussing with the administration what the next steps are in terms of the outline business case, which is the next stage of the business case process.
forgot about my microphone there for a minute. Given that, 2022, I think we've all, as councillors, had experience of any kind of road scheme taking perhaps rather longer than was planned, shall we say, charitably. Is there any way of conditioning this so that should the funds commencement of an actual scheme start, then the scheme could be curtailed within 3 years, a bit before its 3-year time plan? And secondly, I understand that new cycle paths now have to be 5 metres wide. Are there not a number of existing cycle paths so that are 3 metres wide already?
Not all of our existing routes are LTN 120 compliant. LTN 120 has set new requirements for compliance. I don't know the conditioning answer. One thing I was going to say, which I think is in the report, we'd be more than happy to work on a temporary cycle route through there as part of the programme when it's all pulled together, but as part of a wider plan for what happens now going forwards to whatever scheme we might take forward. Richard?
Yes, the curtailment of the permission, that's quite a tricky one really, because a temporary permission is what is being sought, and we're saying, in liaison with our colleagues in transport, even the 3 years will cause issues with that. It's, at the end of the day, it's whether it's acceptable to the applicant. Obviously, they've spent money in terms of making the application that they have, and will obviously spend money in delivering the permission if that's what happens. So limiting even the 3-year timescale that they're proposing could be problematic, and we would have to give some thought as to what the trigger would be in terms of what curtailment was. It'd be unusual, but not impossible, I think.
John?
I just wanted to understand around what's been said about the announcement that there were no plans to do anything with this piece of land. Is it possible that there are no longer plans to do anything with this land, but you've just not been told? And therefore, are you working on something that somebody's already decided they don't want to do? I'm just confused over it's earmarked for this, we're going ahead with this, although it may take longer than the temporary permission lasts, and somebody, another department perhaps saying, actually, we're not planning to do anything with this, and maybe just two departments not talking to each other?
So the process we've been going through is a business case process where we have to assess all the options. So we've drawn up a number of options, and that process started quite some time ago. So there are a variety of options. I would say all of them include a segregated cycle path along the Cullington Road link as part of the final scheme. Obviously, there have been statements made by the administration about not having a busy road and such like along there. That doesn't necessarily remove all of the options that are being considered. So, if you were putting public transport along the corridor, for example, rather than general traffic, we've been doing that process of looking at all the options. We're discussing those options with local councillors and with the administration to see which options they would want to take forward to further consultation with the public.
John, again.
So just my follow-up on that then. So if this was given the go-ahead and this temporary cycle path was put in place, and it was done so not meeting the exact specifications that we're meant to have now for cycle paths, and then the council scheme went ahead, and let's say there wasn't a desire for a busy road and it ended up that they wanted a cycle and a walk path, would this not be setting the foundations for the work you would be doing anyway, potentially? As in, you would expand and improve what's been put in temporarily?
So I think we're keen to have a cycle route along this corridor. What my preference would be to work with the applicants, which I understand because of timescales, things came forward, to agree a way of having a temporary solution whilst the further schemes are developed and delivered, which is then upgraded to a permanent solution rather than potential wasting of materials and funds, and also potentially putting something in place that might jeopardise the potential schemes that might come forward. So that's where the objection comes from, that if we put something in place that gives the land a certain degree of permission, it may restrict the options for delivering a more comprehensive transport solution for the area. if we do bring forward a more comprehensive solution, certainly temporary uses would be part of that discussion.
Guy, followed by Ed.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come back to this in the discussion, but the question for now is, what would the decision pathway look like from here to the alternative use being developed? Is this something that would still require a cabinet decision? How definite is the scheme for which this money is earmarked, and what has to happen between now and then to make it happen?
So the funding is, as I say, is part of the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement, which was submitted to the DFT. They're shortly going to respond to our overall business case. Any scheme would have to go through the business case process, so it has to go through outline business case and full business case. The outline business case sets out the kind of general high-level idea of what the scheme is. That would require cabinet submission and potentially a degree of planning consideration. Once you've gone through that stage, you've got a pretty clear idea of what you're delivering. The final stage is a full business case, which incorporates all procurement and further detailed design elements before you sign off the funding for actual delivery of the scheme. That process is a kind of 2 to 3 year process, but the OBC would probably set out what the likely solution is and therefore enable a better understanding of what the temporary measure would be during the development of the overall scheme.
Ed?
I'm just going to follow up on that point. So what you're saying is it's going to be at least 3 years to develop a business case before any spades go in the ground, other than maybe a bit of ground investigations.
I'd have to check the timescales. The programme that I've seen shows us being able to deliver the project within the 5-year CRSTS programme. So I would think it's kind of 2 to 3 years of business case, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. But part of that will involve ground investigations, things like that, being on site and doing some stuff in the area. And as I say, I guess my preference, whatever happens today, would be to work with the applicants based on what we're developing and have a joined up approach. You know, I think we felt we had to put in an objection because it ties our hands a bit, and I would like to develop a solution that suits everyone.
So effectively what we're saying is that it takes 3 years to do a business case. You may need to go and do a bit of digging up bits of ground, but you could probably sample other bits around the containers, and then you would be able to sequence some construction thereafter. So I think that's what I've heard. And really, we all know that if you've got until 2027 to do it, it's going to be the last 18 months when actually the construction takes place.
Yeah, in terms of the construction, but obviously getting approvals for the scheme is key, and that requires it's going to require planning approval. It's going to require a number of different processes for us to go through, and having a more open opportunity to do that obviously is key to progressing the scheme as quickly as we can.
That's exactly my next point, actually, if I may, Chair, is I'm just struggling to understand this. Is it actually a planning thing that it could materially become a consideration which alters the decision that might be made in the future? Because I'm struggling to see how that logically actually works. It seems to me that if it's a temporary solution and a notice put on file, every report I've read from a planning officer talks about previous planning permissions on this, and we can make sure that any note that's put on the file is explicit that this is 3 years and that there are other potential uses for it.
Philip,
that was a question. I'm sorry. We haven't started the debate yet. So I'm assuming that's something that we could put on file, and therefore it won't be prejudicial in terms of material considerations.
Gary?
Well, any permission granted, even if temporary... Oh, Richard, any permission granted may well be for a 3-year period. The applicant would be well within their rights to apply for a further period of time. That may be in the light or despite an alternative proposal coming forward. So a decision today can't completely predetermine what happens after 3 years. So I think that's where the nervousness comes about from how temporary is temporary, and is a better way of working together to deliver something in the shorter term whilst the kind of the main project following consultation actually gets delivered. And so that the kind of the route of the recommendation is in the protection, the protected route, which foresees a project to be delivered. As with lots of other strategic transport projects, this has taken a long time. We are at the successful end of that process now, with the funding being either confirmed or about to be. So it's a difficult time now to grant permission for an alternative. And whilst it clearly, in principle, is compatible, the level of detail needs working through. So, and I think that would need to be worked through in collaboration rather than what this would be, which would be a standalone permission.
And could we possibly condition if the containers own the land, which is apparently what's going to happen, and possibly doing the City Council a favour by effectively preventing the need for a CPO in the future? Could we condition that, or that there is some form of memorandum of understanding or heads of terms put in place to make sure that the owner recognises that they will have to cede the land at some point, preventing the need for a CPO, slowing down the whole project?
In a word, no. Unfortunately not, no. Planning can't interfere with land ownership. This is an application that's made. It has to be blind to land ownership. So whilst it may only be a 3-year permission, it could be longer. And there'd be no obligation that the planning authority could put on the applicant about making it easier to deliver after those 3 years.
Philippa.
Thank you. This might be a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So if cycles go down, if it becomes a temporary cycle path, and because cycles are using it all the time, it therefore becomes a general right of way because it's being used as a cycle path. Would that stop it being a mass transport plus cycle path in future, or a road with a cycle path on it in future?
Not 100%, I suppose. I think obviously it can be a mass transit and cycle route, but it may restrict the ability to develop the proposals. That's our concern around it.
I could answer that. The short answer, Philippa, is no, because it would be permissive. The landowner would grant permissive access, and it would never become a public right of way.
So that public right of way could be for bikes and walking and mass transport or anything in future?
In future.
Yeah, thank you.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a general question about the timetable, really, and we're talking about a 3-year temporary application. Now, I'm aware, obviously, as this has been put forward with a recommendation for refusal, even if colleagues were minded to grant it permission today, it would then come back to a subsequent planning meeting. So when would the 3 years actually start? Would it start from the commencement of the buildings or the placement of the containers? Does it start from when all the work's finished? That's just a general question, please.
It would start when the decision was issued, but you're quite right. If the committee was minded to grant approval today, then we would have to go away and formulate a number of pre-commencement conditions to secure all the additional information that's required. Further to that, we'd need to get the unilateral undertaking signed, which could take a number of weeks with our legal team and solicitors of the applicant. So realistically, as I said, the 3-year permission would start when we issued the decision, but that could be realistically August, September time.
And the current protocol, Chair, if I'm right, is if members are minded to make a decision against officer's recommendation, it does have to come back to a subsequent...
No, that's not correct, actually. It's purely if it's where the officers are proposing approval, we elect for refusal, because in that event the applicant has a right to appeal, in which they may have it sustained, of course, and costs awarded against us. So were we minded to approve, it would be wholly up to us. If members are happy, I'll move to the debate now. Several years ago, a colleague, not a colleague, an opponent of mine actually in this very place accused me of being the honourable member for the motor car. I plead guilty to that. Personally, I'm quite proud to actually stick up for the motorist, and I think they certainly require someone in this city to do so. Having said that, I am not blind to the fact that any city, least of all, or certainly Bristol, actually needs to implement more sustainable forms of transport, including cycling and pedestrian use, of course. And it seems to me this is just the sort of thing the council has been actually trialling and encouraging for years and years. So it does rather depress me that actually we seem to have been obstructing progress here. And it seems to me that we could have had some of the progress which officers have mentioned about agreeing conditions in advance if we hadn't been, as a council, so obstructive. Overall, every other council department seems to be happy not to object. Transport, it's purely transport which is placing on objection to this. And in my view, I think we have to make a judgment about this. I know, and I'm sure you know for experience, how the council works and central government. And frankly, as I've hinted before, I don't believe we're going to get any road in 3, 4, perhaps 5 years or so. So if we were minded to grant a temporary approval here, funded not by the taxpayer, but by actually income, which the applicants are proposing, they actually produce themselves, so they're not going cap in hand to the taxpayer. Surely that's got to be a positive thing. So I would be minded to look positively on this application and to approve it. Paul?
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Chair, and the submissions that have been made, the vast number of letters in support and a small number against. It does seem a bit of a no-brainer, and whilst there may be plans for a road in the future, I'm also representing a ward with the South Bristol Link Road, and I'm well aware of the spaces that were left empty for, as you say, 60, 70 years. So yeah, I'm minded to support this.
Philippa?
I think one thing we haven't spoken about much is the benefits of the small business opportunities as well. I think if you've got 50 containers, you've potentially got 100 people in work. Each of those could be supporting a family. That's bringing in a lot of income at a time that's been really, really difficult following, as the pandemic continues and all the other situations.
That's a very valid point. Thanks for making that.
I think that most of us are not entirely persuaded that this temporary application will pose an obstruction to longer term plans, really, are we? So I think it's going to be Green Party councillor votes for cycle path. Shocker. Sorry about that, everybody.
Ed?
I find this very difficult because LTN 120, for people who don't know, it's Local Transport Note 120, is the new government guidance for cycle paths, and it raises the standards enormously. And I think it is of concern that this doesn't meet those standards. Having said that, I think you can't argue it both ways. If you wanted the full standards to be put in place, it would require you to tarmac the entire route. It would require you to do all sorts of things which are probably beyond the cost of the landowner. And actually, it's guidance to local authorities about how to get government money It's not necessarily an absolute guide as to how to do it. So if it was the local authority bringing this forward, I would be recommending we should turn it down because it doesn't meet the standards and it's not good enough. But because this is a temporary solution, I think that we can probably just about allow that through. One of the there's a couple of comments I'd like to make about the some of the comments in the report. One of them is it doesn't show how motorcycles will be prevented from using the path. I don't know if the person who wrote that report has read LTN 120 because it says you must maintain a gap of at least 150 centimetres on any cycle path, which isn't enough to keep motorbikes out. So you can't reference LTN 120 and say it doesn't keep motorbikes out. So I'd like not to see that again in future comments, please. I think we've all discussed the lawful after 3 years enough. I think this thing about there are no plans to build a road there is just being economic with the truth. There are no plans because they haven't been put in place yet, but it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be plans. And I think that's rather a worrying thing. And lastly, I mentioned last time I was here about equalities that if we're looking at alternative walking routes to alternative pubs to assess the viability of a pub, there are equalities implications, but the officer's report said there are no equalities implications here. One of the whole tenets of LTN 120 is that it makes better provision, particularly for women who are afraid of not only road safety, but personal and community safety. And LTN 120 is designed to improve that. So I do think that the planning officer might just want to consider that. The only other thing I'm contested by, and I'd like, I'll certainly be looking at this in the future, is actually that on that equalities angle, really the best place for cycle routes is right in front of people's houses, not down a cutting and round the back of their back gardens. So I do hope that any plans that come forward will be thinking about putting a segregated cycle route both on this alignment and on the A4. Thank you, Chair.
Guy.
It's quite difficult to follow someone who's a genuine expert. So no, I was just quickly looking up some of the press coverage of this, and what Councillor Varney says seems to be exactly spot on. The council at one point was denying that there ever had been a plan to do anything on this tract of land, followed by a rapid scrapping of it, of a plan that presumably had never existed. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. It also does make me think, I would love to tell people who cycle up and down the Gloucester Road that they're not safe unless they've got a good 5 metres clearance. No, I think we may have a case of consensus chasing its tail here. I do genuinely feel for the transport officers concerned, and I am wondering if there is, the term that keeps coming to mind is passive provision. If there was any possibility of doing this in such a way that minimised the risk to any future project that could come along, that would be wonderful, but I don't think we've got enough. I can't see myself voting against this on the grounds that I've got in front of me. It looks like such a good scheme.
John.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on what Philippa said, actually. It's not to ignore the fact of these containers providing space for creative businesses. More and more central office space is being turned into accommodation when Bristol's known for being such an amazing creative city. And especially with such a big freelancer community, there's not many places for these people to go. So aside from the fact is that I don't think it will hinder any future projects. I don't think the Transport Department are completely against it. They would just prefer not to have it. And it's giving people a workplace. Tory also likes environmental plan.
Well, according to my maths, there isn't one member who believes we should actually refuse this. As you may be aware, it's necessary to vote on the officer recommendation first before we move to actually approval. So not because I'm in favour of this, but purely to put it to the vote. Can I move the application, the officer's recommendations? Do I have a seconder? John, thanks. Right, I'll go to a name vote. Those obviously in favour of the officer recommendation, so it's for or against. John? Guy? Fee? Ed? Philippa? Paul? And I'm against. So in that case, it falls. I therefore propose we actually approve the application, and then the officers are delegated to agree conditions. I propose those, if necessary, come to a Leeds Agenda Conference for agreement. So that would avoid further delay, of course. Do I have a seconder? Fee? Thanks. So again, the choices for the approval or against. John? Sorry, Guy? For Fee? Ed? Philippa? Paul? And I'm for. So unanimously for. It's passed. So Richard, we now move to the second application. I believe you have 3 minutes to propose this, but bearing in mind you probably said most of what you wanted today may not require quite as long.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to the land to the immediate south, to what we've just been discussing. Again, it's a temporary 3-year permission, but this time it's just for a pedestrian and cycle pathway. It extends between Tramway Road and land to the south of Talbot Road, which is currently occupied by Bristol Metals Recycling Yard, beyond which lies the Whitchurch Way cycle path. Obviously, it's going to have similar implications to the future development of the Carlington Road link, which we've just discussed. There is an error in my report that I need to rectify. I said that the application had been called in by Councillor Rippington by accident, when in fact he hadn't. He just submitted a letter of support. In total, there's 287 letters of support and 16 objections. And again, the officer recommendation is the application is refused for broadly the same reasons. The application site's the bit in red there, which we all know where it is now. That's the entrance to it. This is the view south towards the Bath Road Bridge. You'll see that the existing hard standing is quite overgrown, and we don't actually know what the condition of it is. Here's the bit of land between the Bath Road Bridge and the Talbot Road Bridge to the south. This is looking north underneath the Talbot Road Bridge. The overgrown bit to the left is where the proposed pathway across the Bristol Metals Recycling Yard is going to go. That's a view of the recycling yard. Up to the top right-hand corner is where the Whitchurch Way is. So, unlike the last application, this one is very, very light on detail. This is the only plan drawing we have. The area that's hatched in green states that there'll be no construction works whatsoever, and so it's only the existing tarmac, which we've just seen is quite overgrown, which is going to be used for the cycle path. We don't have any indication how wide the path's going to be. The bit in pink below is the new link to the Whitchurch Way, which cuts across the top bit of the Bristol Metal Yard site. There's a little bit more detail to this provided in the planning statement. It's just some annotations as to what is actually going to happen, but you'll see this is Talbot Road, and then this is the disused entrance to the metals site. This is going to be opened up to provide a pedestrian link to Talbot Road, and then this red line is the pathway, is the ramp that's going to lead up to the Whitchurch Way. A bit more detail in the planning statement, but these can only be considered as indicative or illustrative drawings because they're not to scale, and we haven't really got any detail. Like, we don't know, for instance, where the landfill is going to come from to support the path, which is a bit of a concern because there's contaminated land issues with the recycling yard. Again, we've got the applications contrary to BCS 10 and DM 24. So those reasons for refusal and objection remain from TDM, but this time it's considered that there's a significant lack of detail in terms of what the pathway is actually going to be made from, because we've got no details of whether the existing surface is acceptable or not. I mean, myself and the transport officers have been to the site. There is hard standing, it is tarmacked, but as we all know, that doesn't necessarily make it safe for all members, especially those on bikes and other forms of transport. As mentioned, the cross-section plans don't really detail how the proposed path is going to link with the Whitchurch Way. So if members are minded to approve this one, we are going to have to condition all these details. So therefore, the two reasons for refusal relate to the fact that it's contrary to the safeguarded policies relating to the Carlington Road link, and the fact that we don't have enough detail to make a fully informed decision at this stage.
Thanks, Richard. can I make a statement here? Clearly, this is a separate application, though completely complementary to the previous one. We've heard from the applicant previously, who acknowledged that there's conditionable information he requires to submit. So clearly, there isn't an obstacle to that, of course. So any conditions would wait until that's received. If the officers had doubts also, they would bring that to the leads as per our previous arrangements, of course. So I believe, to my satisfaction, those arrangements seem fairly straightforward. Does anyone else have any questions? Sorry, Steve. Unfortunately, we took both public forum together,
Yes,
so in fact that precludes you. So I'm sorry.
Fair enough. I was going to say I need to bring to your attention that I live within a quarter of a mile of both of those sites. Anyway.
Well, yes, but since sadly you're not able to vote, it's not relevant, thanks. So in that case, can we move to the debate? Or Ed?
I just wanted to ask transport officers if they, it was very good here, Adam, to hear you saying that you'd be willing to work with the applicants if members were minded to approve the last one. Is that the case on this one? Because there is a stunning lack of detail on this design. Yeah. And I'm very concerned that it's taken a very long time for this application to get there, because there's been a toing and froing, I believe, of wanting specific designs, and in the end that's not come forward. So I just wanted to make sure that you'd be willing to do that and willing to expedite it in order that we can get this on the ground as soon as we can, so that the 3 years ends as soon as it can.
I think the previous application obviously had a lot more detail and was much better thought through and submitted. That drawing there, I don't know what to say about the kind of quality of submission. It's hard for us to say yes, go ahead with something when there's so little detail in it. Obviously we are keen to support delivering sustainable transport routes and making them as comprehensive as possible, and we'd look to do that, but there's so little detail. It's hard to say.
With respect, Adam, that wasn't Councillor Plowden's question. He acknowledged that, of course. What he was saying, are you prepared to actually work hand in glove with the applicant to ensure that information is forthcoming? So in planning terms, it may be acceptable. That was the question.
And I mean, the point I was making is there's so little detail. We're not here to design routes for applicants. Obviously, we'll work with them to try and get something workable, but there's a difference between...
That's what we wanted to check, so I accept that. Guy, did you have a question?
I just wanted to ask, I do appreciate, and I've become quite fond of this scheme over the last 45 minutes or so. Are there concerns that you've got because of the lack of detail that might give greater cause for concern than with the previous application? Are there risks you think we might not be thinking of? Are there severe worries? Or are we still really talking about the risk to a future plan? Is there something you think could happen here that would put a cyclist at serious risk or people at serious risk?
Well, I think you can see from the minimal detail that has been provided, there's essentially structural works, there's contaminated land in the area. We don't know what the issues are because we don't have any of the detail. I think in terms of the other elements I've seen in the planning response about overlooking and such like, having a number of shipping containers on the other proposal gives you a degree of kind of overlooking and a bit of safety that you're not getting that same thing here. So the lack of detail does make it more concerning for me, and I can't sit here as a council officer and say we're going to design the route up. And yet there is a lot of detail still remaining on this part of the application.
Gary?
Yes, to help answer that, I think, there's clearly a lack of detail on this one. Really, that would mean that if committee were minded to grant permission for this scheme, we would have to put on more pre-commencement conditions requiring that level of detail in order to try and close down those potential risks. So the applicant would have to submit those details and satisfy us before works commenced on site. One technicality that, due to legislation brought in 3 or 4 years ago, applicants have to explicitly agree to pre-commencement conditions. So in the event that the committee also support this scheme, hopefully the constructive dialogue with the applicant would be, yes, we need to put these conditions on, can you agree? And they do agree, fine, we can issue a decision in those circumstances. If the applicant doesn't agree to those pre-commencement conditions, we would have to bring it back, really, so to the
us.
full committee.
Yeah.
So just to kind of alert you that we can cover off some of those risks through pre-commencement conditions, but we can't just impose them. The applicant has to explicitly agree to them.
Thanks, Gary. Shall we move then to do any members have additional comments on this, subject to the need for the information we've discussed and we acknowledged? In which case, can I formally, as I did before, move the offers of recommendation, which is refusal? So the choices for or against. John, can you second this? And John? Which way are you voting? So, against. Guy? Ed? Philippa? And Paul? And I'm voting against. Therefore, can I move approval subject to the conditions delegated? And you've heard that actually pre-commencement arrangements, and if there's a failure to provide those, it needs to come back here. Is there a seconder, Paul? And we'll vote for, and the choices for or against, John? What, Guy? V? Ed? Philippa? Paul? And I'm voting for, so that's unanimously approved. Thank you. Right, the next item is actually also in Bristol Flowers Hill. So if we can have Tom here. And Councillor Pearce, I'm glad to say you can fully participate now so we can hear your stream of consciousness technique. So we have 2 public forum items here. Firstly, Councillor Varney.
Thank you, Chairman. This statement is also on behalf of my ward colleague, Councillor Joss Clark. As the 2 local ward councillors, I just want to let committee members know that we have no objections to this application. It is making good use of a brownfield site and providing much needed accommodation in the area. We've had a good working relationship with the developers and their agents thus far, and are pleased they appear to have listened to our concerns and those of local residents. We are especially pleased that our suggestion for footpath and cycleway, not cyclepaths again, linking Flowers Hill and Hungerford Road is to proceed, although we note that this will be a separate planning application. And we're also pleased that we're able to get Class F added to the possible uses of the listed war rooms, as we would both like to see some form of community use, public access for this interesting and unusual space. Thank you.
Thanks. And Luke Challenger, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman and all. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm Luke Challenger from Black Box Planning, and we're the agents. You have a very comprehensive report from your officers, for which we are grateful. There are 3 main points I wish to emphasise. Number one, this scheme is an opportunity for the city to deliver much needed new homes on a brownfield site in a highly sustainable neighbourhood. It delivers a site allocated in the local plan, and it repurposes the Grade 2 listed war room, ensuring a viable use can be found to protect its historic interest. We would also like to thank Hungerford Road Community Centre for engaging positively to enable the delivery of a new footway cycleway link from the site through to Hungerford Road, which, as you would have heard from Councillor Varney, is a welcome addition to the wider proposals. We note that no comments or objections have been received from neighbours, and we hope that members can endorse officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom?
Thank you, Chair. So this application site is in Brislington, southwest centre. Sorry, southeast. The site is occupied currently by officers belonging to the Department of Work and Pensions, and the Bristol Driving Test Centre, and also the War Room, which is a listed building. The previous occupants, however, have vacated the site last year, so it is currently a vacant site. There's only one access to the site from Flowers Hill to the north via Bath Road. The Brislington Retail Park is located to the north. The Flowers Hill Trading Estate is directly to the east, which is a principal industrial warehousing area, and residential properties are located to the south on Hungerford Road and Hungerford Crescent. So this is an aerial image of the site, showing it in a bit more detail. You can see the offices for the Department of Work and Pensions, single-storey structures, Brislington Driving Test Centre to the north, and the War Room down here is this building shrouded in ivy or something along those lines. The application site is allocated in the local plan, so it's allocated for housing and business. There's also a number of considerations that are highlighted in the site allocation, namely that any application would need to address noise and pollution from nearby industrial uses, respond appropriately to the listed building, and have detail regarding land stability, coal risk, health impact assessment, and flood risk. So the application is outline for the demolition of the existing buildings on site, apart from the War Room, which will remain, and the construction of up to 160 residential units. Approval is only sought for access at this stage. Appearance, layout, landscaping and scale are reserved for future consideration, so they're known as the reserved matters, and there'll be a separate application or applications in the future seeking approval for those issues. So no comments have been received in this application in support or objection. So as I just mentioned, the application is an outline with only access submitted for determination, so there aren't that many plans to consider at this stage. However, to ease the assessment, a general master plan has been provided, which is the plan currently shown, but this is only indicative at this stage and shows how a potential layout could look in the future. And overall, following the submission of this and following the assessment of the site context and bearing in mind the site allocation, officers are satisfied that this overall quantum of development, land use and access arrangements to the site can be reasonably accommodated. There are, however, two main issues that have been considered at this stage, which I'll touch on briefly, and that is the access to the site and the use of the War Room. So in terms of access to the site, as previously noted, there's only one current access into and out of the site from the north via Flowers Hill. Concerns were raised on both highways and design grounds that this would have resulted in the creation of an island development, which would have restricted integration and engendered a sense of living in an enclave for future occupants, and overall result in poor legibility, difficult circulation, and poor access to services and public transport routes to the south of the site for future occupants. So therefore, following lengthy discussions between the council, the developer and the adjacent Hungerford Road Community Centre, which is this building to the south, a proposal has been put forward to construct a segregated cycle pedestrian route through the adjoining site. So you can see from this plan it will be to the east of the community centre and would link up to the wider site to the north. So this proposal is subject to a separate application which is currently being considered by the council, subject to clarity on a few issues and some additional detail. It's very nearly at the stage when it will be recommended for approval. Public consultation has been undertaken on this proposal, and it's generated 10 letters of support and no objections. So existing residents in Hungerford Road and the surrounding areas have recognised that this development would be of benefit to them with regards to easier access to services and facilities to the north. So overall, that this link will ensure that there's adequate permeability through the site, avoid the creation of an island development, and would overall be of benefit to future residents and also existing residents. So the completion of this link and will be tied to the main outline permission via Section 106 agreement to ensure that it is delivered and completed, so it can be used by future residents. In terms of the war room, this is quite an unusual listed building.
I don't wish to truncate you, but you're about a minute over your time, so I assume you'll be fairly robustly succinct.
Yeah, I think this is the last slide.
Fine.
Yeah. An unusual listed building. It was designed as a nuclear bunker from the 1950s. So obviously, converting it to a new use is a challenge. However, following discussions with the applicant, we are satisfied that the proposed new uses are acceptable in principle for the historic building. So they are sort of business uses, community uses, and commercial uses, which in principle the council's conservation officer is satisfied with. Any future reserve matters application will need to allow for an appropriate setting for this building to make sure that it is celebrated in the site as part of the master plan. But as I mentioned, that will be considered at reserve matters stage. So overall, officers are happy with the proposal and have recommended approval, and that's subject to the conditions set out in the report and summarised on screen alongside a Section 106 legal agreement covering various other elements. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I've only got one question. On page 84, you state actually that we have an affordable housing element of 9%, which you say is policy compliant. That seems a bit shock to me. Is that because of the work on the war room and also towards the pedestrian access?
So no, that's not. Sometimes when there is an affordable housing offer that's lower than normally accepted in an area. So this area of the city, the normal affordable housing offer would be 30%. Sometimes it is permitted to allow a lower offer if viability does indicate that it wouldn't be possible to deliver that on site. In this instance, however, the lower percentage is due to something called vacant building credit.
Right.
So this was an initiative brought in 2014 by the government, so it now forms part of the National Planning Policy Framework, so it's national planning policy. And it was essentially an incentive to support the development of brownfield lands. So essentially, if vacant buildings are being brought back into use or demolished and housing is being constructed in place, a credit is issued with the equivalent of the gross floor area of vacant buildings is basically deducted from the affordable housing offer. So taking into consideration this, the affordable housing offer was reduced to 9%, which the council's planning obligations manager has assessed and is happy with.
Right, fine.
Tom's explained it really well there, Ched, but just to emphasise that isn't going to make any kind of subjective assessment. That's an absolute, the most we can require under policy, local and national, is 9%, just to be really clear.
Fair enough. Paul? No. Steve?
Good afternoon, Chair. Unusually, purely to help abbreviate our discussions this afternoon, I'm going to ask the question that I always try to ask, which is this proposal policy compliant? I find that an answer to that sometimes helps us along with our decision making.
Policy compliant in which respect, sorry?
In every respect.
I would say yes, it is.
Yes. Guy?
So forgive me, Chair, but it seems that we have happy officers, happy councillors and happy residents. I'm just wondering why the decision wasn't made under delegated powers. The last time I asked this, it transpired that the building in question was owned by the Lord Mayor. I don't think that's the case this time.
Gary?
I think to answer that, obviously we at the agenda meeting, we do bring forward reports that we're proposing to bring to the main committee meeting for a dialogue with each of the party leads. And in particular, we were keen to bring this because of the sheer scale of it. It's a big site. It's introducing housing, yes, near to other housing, but also near to employment land. So it's one of those allocations that was originally made in the local plan and is to be reinforced in the revised local plan. I think the sheer scale of the proposed development warranted committee consideration.
Which I think leads neatly into the debate, which probably will be quite focused. Can I say to repeat your view, really, it is policy compliant. It seems to actually meet every need. I'm delighted to see the Warring being refurbished and used, of course. We're going to see additional public access, and we'll see that cycleway and etc. That's all positive. And we've got policy compliant affordable housing added to the fact there are not one person who has opposed 160 homes in Brislington has got to be good news. So I'm delighted. I congratulate officers, but even more so the applicant, and I'll be voting for this. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Most of my concerns, all of my concerns, I think have been addressed. Pleased to see housing in Brislington. I had concerns around the heritage of the war rooms, which is an interesting building and an interesting former use. I had concerns about permeability of the site, but those appear to have been addressed via the community centre. And that permeability will help residents in Hungerford Road better access arterial bus routes. So that is a very worthwhile gain. And I will be voting in favour of this proposal.
Steve. Ed?
There's obviously a lot to like about this, and the only disappointing thing is that 9% affordable housing seems low. I know that that's policy. There seems to be a perverse incentive for landowners to kick people out of maybe commercial premises or any premises in order that they can make sure that they're vacant. It seems that this was occupied until quite recently. And I personally would like to see that the applicants, particularly if it's government land, doing better, because 9% just scraping past the bare minimum of affordability seems to be a pity, and it would be nice to see a higher, we can't condition it, but it would be nice, I'd like really the minutes to reflect the fact that that's disappointing.
John? No. In that case, can I propose we meet, Philippa?
Sorry, thank you. Can I just support, first of all, what Councillor Plowden said? And also, could the conditions about trees be as strict as possible, please? There's some quite mature trees on site.
Tom, can you just repeat for the record what's the condition about the trees?
So there's a few conditions about trees. At this stage, obviously, again, it's an outline, so it is only the access we're looking at. At reserve matter stage, we would look at landscaping, which is one of those particular matters, and we would make sure that all existing trees on site are suitably protected, and any trees that are removed would need to be replaced on site. That would need to be considered fully at reserve matter stage, but there are conditions on the permission which do cover that. If you'll just bear with me. So that condition 3 in the report is prior to commencement of development, an arboricultural impact assessment, arboricultural method statement and tree protection plan should be submitted. So hopefully all the trees will be adequately accounted for in that report.
Are you happy? Yeah. In that case, can I suggest we move to the vote? Can I formally move the offers of recommendation to approve? Guy, you've seconded, so again, for or against? John? Guy? Fee? Ed? Steve? Philippa? Paul? And I'm for, so that's unanimous approval, subject to conditions. Thank you. Then we just moved to the final item. Welcome back, Councillor Varney. Could I invite Councillor Holland to come forward?
This is exciting. I love a revisit to a DC committee. Thanks, colleagues, for accepting the statement that I've put in on behalf of the applicants who are also here and will speak to you in a moment. I was brought up in a council house on a corner site which had a huge garden, and when on a recent trip back to Nottingham, I noticed that that house has been split into 2 flats and the garden has been split into 2. So we know that making the best use of property and gardens is something that we're doing and other local authorities are doing it all over the place. In my statement, I refer to the project in Knoll West, which is really very, very successful and is allowing people to use their gardens for developing small housing units, and that makes the best use of that garden space. And those of us with largely estate wards will know that there's a tragic underuse, actually, of many of the gardens, which are allowed to go to rack and ruin and you know, overgrowth. It's worth saying, and you'll see it in the presentation, that the site adjacent was sold off by the council for 2 properties anyway, and both of those properties have a smaller garden than the garden of the proposed dwelling will have. So I do hope that you'll have a really good look at the application and make your own minds up. And it's disappointing that it's had a recommendation to refuse.
Thanks, Helen. Craig Mockridge. Craig.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I would like to start by talking about any concerns raised regarding overlooking. We have addressed these by moving the position of the door from the side of the building to the rear of the property. It now looks out across the garden and not onto any other property. We have also incorporated a panel fence around the boundary of the development and for struggling to see it. And for the blank elevation, we have tried to overcome this by installing... Sorry, can I start again?
Yeah.
I'm trying to adjust. I don't wear glasses all the time, so my eyes are trying to adjust to read this. Sorry. Right. So yeah, to address overlooking over the property, we have also incorporated a panel fence around the boundary of the development, and for the blank elevation, we have tried to overcome this by installing recessed panels into the wall in question. So we have tried to address these issues and hope this will be a satisfactory solution. Also, this development has been designed with the elderly and disabled in mind and will provide a very sought after and affordable dwelling in a mostly deprived area where there is a shortage of such homes. So our intention is to build and rent the property either privately or to the local authority, who will be given first refusal. So providing the local authority, for example, the chance to move an elderly or disabled couple from an otherwise tied up 3-bed council house into a more suitable bungalow and freeing up a much needed 3-bed house for another family home. Also, the land that this development will be built on, if planning is granted, was not originally part of the garden of 2 Lyveden Gardens, but was actually wasteland adjoining the previous garage site that was purchased by the previous owners before we bought the property. The garage site has since been developed, as Ms Holland just said, by the local authority with the construction of 2 2-bed houses, of which we had no objection to, as we feel this could only enhance an otherwise disused garage site which was being used as a local dump. So our proposed development will not impact on the garden size of number 2 and will itself have a sufficient size garden, as it was never part of the original house. Finally, I would like to ask that you look at this application and consider the case we have put forward and base your decision solely on this application and not previous refusals, like we think has been the case in the past on previous applications. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. By the way, Craig, I gave you a bit of latitude with the time. Firstly, because you were the last person today we were seeing. And secondly, if you're forgiven in joke, that you weren't Councillor Negus. But we now move to the case officer, Sophie Clark, on my right. Now, I believe it's the first time Sophie's presented to us. I have actually said the members aren't as scary as they may appear, but of course I'm a Tory councillor, so I'm convincing it, telling untruths. So, Sophie.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So the application is for a 2-bedroom single-storey dwelling within the existing garden of number 2 Lyveden Gardens. The application site is located to the south of Hengrove Way and in the Hartcliffe and Withy. The site is part of the rear garden of the existing property. It doesn't have a street frontage, however, it does address a footway which runs between Lyveden Gardens and Horsham Grove, and it is therefore visible from the public realm. So here is a view of the existing properties in Lyveden Gardens, and the entrance to the footway is shown just there. This is a view of the footway itself, and the red line is shown just for illustrative purposes to give an idea of the approximate size of the proposal and how it would address the footway. And then this is another view from further along the footway with the red line again shown for illustrative purposes only. So turning to the site history, there have been a number of applications on this site which have been refused. However, the latest application has attracted some support from neighbours and correspondence with the local ward councillor, who has referenced that it should be supported. Given these conflicting views, we are bringing the application to committee for discussion. There have been various reasons for refusal for the previous applications. However, all of the applications have been refused on the grounds of design. This is on the basis that they have been considered to result in a cramped and awkward arrangement and overdevelopment of the site, which would result in harm to the character and appearance of the area. 3 of the previously refused applications have been appealed and subsequently dismissed by the Planning Inspectorate. On all three occasions, inspectors have concluded that the various schemes would result in a cramped and awkward arrangement which would be harmful to the character of the area. So the current application is a resubmission of the most recently refused application on this site. So these are the plans for the most recently refused application. The previous application was similarly refused on the grounds of design, as it was considered to result in an overdevelopment of the site. It should be noted that although the proposal was for a single-storey dwelling, the overall built footprint of the proposed dwelling would be larger than the surrounding properties. So the previous application was considered to be lacking in visual interest, as it did not provide an active frontage to the public realm. The application was also refused on the grounds of overlooking as a result of these large glazed doors which would have faced the neighbouring property. So the current application is a resubmission of the previous application, and as you can see, it is very similar. The only changes are that the glazed doors have been moved to the rear elevation, and these recessed rendered panels have been introduced on the principal elevation. As a result of these changes, concerns regarding overlooking have now fallen away, so it's only the design that we are considering to be harmful. The proposal still lacks visual interest and would not provide an active frontage to the public realm, which would be considered to be harmful and would conflict with local plan policy. The citing of the current application is the same as the previous application, so concerns remain regarding the overall built footprint and harm to the character and appearance of the area as a result of overdevelopment of the site. Officers have engaged with the applicants in attempts to overcome issues regarding the overall built footprint and the lack of visual interest. However, unfortunately, no changes to the scheme have been forthcoming. So we acknowledge the benefits of the proposal in that it is providing a new dwelling, albeit only one. However, given the site history and the issues regarding design, we still consider that this particular proposal is unacceptable. And so on this basis, the scheme is brought to committee with a recommendation for refusal.
Thank you, Sophie. Let's move to questions, please. I've got one question which arguably moves into the area of comment, but I'll try to pose it as a question. The property is about 500 yards south of my ward of Bishopsworth, so I visited it on Saturday morning just to have a look. And I must say, I do agree with the applicant and also Councillor Holland. I mean, the access way is wide, it's more like triangular shaped, and there isn't an issue there. And whilst the space argument, one can understand if an applicant was proposing 25, say, or more family homes as a one-off in that site, it does seem a bit rather severe, the approach we're taking. Can you justify that in a one-off situation like this?
So the appeal decisions which have been provided by the Planning Inspectorate are material considerations in our decision making. And I would also say that the local plan does include a policy relating to infill development. So local policy does allow for development of this type. It's just that the specifics of this site are such that we don't feel that this would be an acceptable form of development in this instance. So that we are aware that there have been other developments in similar areas, but it's just that we consider that this particular site isn't particularly viable for this sort of development.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Yeah, John.
Can I just check? It's being refused, or the suggestion is to refuse it based on the, and I think you said appearance and design. I take it doesn't mean that you don't like the colour of it. You mean as in the conditions of the surrounding land and how tight it is into a corner maybe. Is that what you're referring to? Only because obviously when when you live in areas where there's lots of flats and everyone's crammed in, this actually looks great.
Yeah, so firstly, we would consider that the orientation of this particular proposal would be harmful to the character of the area, because areas such as this are essentially, their character is derived from the uniformity of the area. So other developments that have been successful in this area have been broadly in line with the overall street layout. So if I just go back to the large one here. Sorry, it's a little bit difficult to see, but the two houses that were approved in place of the garage site do sort of face towards the square of Lyveden Gardens, which we considered to be broadly in line with the street layout, and this one would just be at a slightly discordant angle, which is a position that's been supported by the appeal decisions leading up to this point. And the other issue is the lack of visual interest on the principal elevation. So whilst it is in a rear garden, it is addressing that footway, so it would be visible from the public realm. And our local plan policy is such that we require an active frontage to the public realm, and this wouldn't provide that.
Steve.
Thank you, Chair. For clarification, am I right in assuming that the applicant is proposing to offer the local authority nomination rights for tenants?
Through planning, that can't be secured, so only affordable housing, so 10 dwellings or more, would trigger that policy requirement, and which would then, trigger those kind of nomination rights. So that might well be the intention, but as local planning authority, we can't secure this through this application.
Okay. But we could nonetheless minute my question and the response. It's just that at some point it might be interesting to say you offered nomination rights on this and you haven't followed through. It's just a...
Could I suggest we now move to debate?
Yeah.
In my view, I have to say I fundamentally disagree with the planning authority's attitude. I've lived in this BS footing area all my life, and I know it well. And I have to say, this sort of area, and as I say, I've physically been there only this weekend, is crying out almost. It's the sort of area where we could actually meet housing need, as we've heard from the applicant, for example, for a disabled couple or an elderly couple who could downsize locally or elsewhere in Bristol, move there. And frankly, surely we're actually looking in our policies first and foremost to address homelessness in Bristol. Surely this sort of thing tackles it straight away without actually having to destroy green fields or perhaps have inappropriate brownfield development. And as we've heard, it may not be scientific, but I believe the two closest neighbours who would be affected support this application. We know there will not be any detrimental residential impact. So on that basis, I'll be supporting this. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. And obviously in line with my co-ward councillor, I know the area well, and I think this is a novel approach. There's lots of things I find visually uninteresting, full council meetings notwithstanding. However, in this case, I will be supporting it.
Yeah, again, I came to this sort of thinking, oh gosh, it's been refused so many times, what's going on, what's Helen playing at? It's access from a footway, but it's not a footway that's exactly some tiny ginnel down a corner, is it? It looks pretty road-like to me.
Right.
So it may not be the most beautiful building in the world, but by God, we've approved worse. So I'm happy to vote for this one.
John?
Yeah, I've seen much worse developments get approved in Cotton as well, funnily enough. Yeah, so I think it's fantastic.
Guy?
I'm hoping the officer isn't going to take it personally. I think it's going to be a unanimous one. It was a fine presentation. Thank you very, very much. I do, though, I feel the need to, and I appreciate they're two different cases, but I do need to draw a parallel with Clyde Park, where we had a similar garden development of a much more out-of-keeping property in a much less appropriate surroundings, and dozens of public objections to it, and an officer recommendation for grant. And here we find a situation where we have an officer recommendation for refusal. And as I say, I do appreciate the cases are different, but it has drawn a parallel in my mind. But I wish the applicants the absolute best with the development of this one.
Could Gary speak, please?
Yes, I don't want to go into a debate over it. Each case is different, but I think the Clyde Park example, that was a property, as you know, larger property onto, was that Clyde Park or Clyde Gardens? And it had a mews, so it had a public highway at the rear, so any development in those back gardens would front onto a public highway and address the highway as other properties around there. So personally, I do see the differences in the cases, but ultimately, you know, it's your decision as individual committee members as to what you want to do.
Andrew?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, if the only obstacle is one of design, and as Councillor Pearce said previously, what is beautiful, it might be beautiful to some people, but, all the other sort of factors in terms of neighbour amenity and sustainability, they're all met. I just think we can't reject it just on one simple factor, which is subjective anyway. So I think I will be supporting the application.
I have to say, your comments reminded me of the famous comment of Ollie Mead, the late and lamented, on planning. And Ollie, commenting on beauty, said, it's very much in the eye of the beholder. I might choose to wear a tutu, but that doesn't make me a ballet dancer. Philippa?
Also, with some planning applications, we look at sort of what is there at the moment and is this any better? Is what's proposed any better? And if you look at the picture of what's there now, sort of brick wall, then I think this is probably more attractive than the brick wall.
Should we therefore move to the vote as item 1? Sorry, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I have had a development in my own ward that's similar in form and very similar in philosophy and in the idea of decanting residents from an under-occupied building into something that is more in keeping with their own ability to keep house and releasing more bedroom spaces to the local authority. I very much approved of that. I very much approve of this, and I'll be voting for it accordingly.
Therefore, like item 1 and 2, we need to move the officer report for a refusal first. So the option here is clearly for or against. John? A Guy? Fee? For Ed? Steve? Philippa? Paul? Andrew? And I vote against. Therefore, can I move actual approval subject to delegated conditions? Paul seconded, and we'll move for or against. John, Guy, Fee, Ed, Steve, Philippa, Paul, Andrew, and I vote for. So that's fully approved, of course. Thank you. Can I thank you for your attendance? It's been a very interesting meeting committee as ever. The officers have produced very detailed and comprehensive reports. Though I must say the outcome reminds me of the very first DC Central I chaired about 50 years ago. Then we actually overturned 3 officer recommendations and reaffirmed 1. So I think I said members, 3 officers, 1. And finally, although I know he was covering this online remotely, can I wish bon voyage to the Adam Postons, who's off for a long weekend in the Canaries. I'm sure he'll return suitably relaxed to keep the council under scrutiny, of course. And formally, just note the date of the next meeting, which is the 27th of April at the Council House. Thank you. I formally close the meeting. Oh, well.